All right, well, I think it's a good time to start. So, hi, everybody. Welcome, fellow color enthusiasts. Welcome to Color Literacy Forum number 3. I'm Luann Stovall. I'm the team lead for Color Literacy Project post-secondary level, which focuses on university students, faculty, administrators, industry professionals, and continuing education for adults. Before we start our program today, though, we would love for you to use a chat box to tell us who you are and where you're from, your university or professional organization, so we can learn more about each other in our global collaboration. And because today's forum is focused on color and light, if you have either taught or taken a color course that includes color and light, please include that in your response. So you might have noticed, and while you're doing that, is everybody looking at, is that working for everybody? Good. Okay, because today's forum is focused on color and light, please give the information. Have you taken a color course or taught a color course that includes color and light in your response? And so I just make sure to do that. So you may have noticed, though, a short survey that was part of the registration for our event today. And there's a few questions about teaching color courses at university level. We are collecting this data for the Color Literacy Project. So if you haven't completed that short form that should have come to your email, please take a few minutes today. It's very short to complete the form, because we really need your feedback. Thank you so much. All right, so the Color Literacy Forum is a new platform designed to build the next generation of 21st century color education at the post-secondary level. The forum provides an opportunity to share innovative teaching methods and resources needed to expand 21st century color education across all disciplines, from art, design, cultural studies, and psychology to the sciences. The long-term goal of this global collaboration is to develop an interdisciplinary model that connects the dots between art and design and the sciences, and aligns color education with current needs in the culture, provides cutting-edge resources, and offers dynamic networking opportunities for all stakeholders. And all stakeholders are you and I and everyone on this planet. The project is a joint collaboration of the Color Literacy Project in partnership with the AIC, that is the International Color Association, which is the home for the study group for color education. And we're going to provide a link in the chat box for the study group for color education. If you haven't joined that, we'd love to have you join that, because that's another way for us to communicate and proceed with color literacy. It's also a collaboration with the Inter-Society Color Council in the USA and Cumulus, the leading global association of art and design research. So the theme of our third forum is color and light. This is the first in a 4-part series of upcoming forums focused on color perception, which is the foundational cornerstone of 21st century color literacy. And that's where we define color literacy here as a phenomenon of color, where it's a dynamic process involving light, matter, each perceiver, and the unique context of the surrounding environment. Our esteemed speaker today is Mark Rosin. Just before I introduce Mark, here's a brief overview of our 90-minute program. So after Mark's 45-minute presentation, there will be a 15-minute Q&A with everyone. So please write your questions in the chat box during the talk. Robin Kingsborough with our project will be curating the questions and feeding them to Mark, so we can have a good conversation here. But as you can tell, we really like an active chat box. So anything you're thinking about question-wise that you have concerns or thoughts about, please use the chat box, because we want your feedback. All right, so after that, we have a final 20 minutes, and that will be an interactive session with all participants in one room rather than in a breakout room. And Ingrid Calvo-Ivanovic will be hosting that session. It'll be a conversation, a discussion directly related to teaching color and light as part of your future color course. Your ideas, experience, and feedback are essential, so we can collaborate on instructional design of plug-in color modules that we will be creating as a resource for teaching 21st century color. So please stay with us for that. All right, now it's my pleasure to introduce Mark. Mark Rosin is an associate professor of physics at Pratt Institute in New York City, and the executive director of Guerrilla Science, We're going to put that link in the box. Guerrilla Science, and an international science and society organization. His work focuses on the connections between science, art, and culture, and their realizations in the public places and spaces that science is least expected. For the last 7 years, he has taught a highly regarded course on the science of light that covers topics in color theory, vision, illusions, and optics from a fundamental physics perspective. Mark is the winner of the Early Career Award for Public Engagement with Science from the American Association for the Advancement of Science and an Ashoka Foundation Emerging Innovator. He has worked at the University of California in Los Angeles and received his PhD from the University of Cambridge. His work with Guerrilla Science has been featured in the New Yorker, the New York Times, and in Vice, and has been supported by the National Science Foundation, the Smithsonian, Wellcome Trust, Simons Foundation, NASA, and Burning Man. So with that, Mark, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Good to meet you all. Hold on for one moment while I share my screen. Okay. So can someone thumbs up that they can see that slide? All right, great. Well, good to meet you all. As you can hear, my voice is slightly croaky. Come down with whatever this flu thing that's going around the world is. So I'll do my best. So just before we get started, I trying very hard to pitch this at the right level. Luann tried to coach me through this, but if I'm going either too quickly or too slowly, it would be really helpful for me if someone just interrupted me and let me know. I think I'm going to struggle to see the chat while I'm presenting on presenter screen, so you can just unmute yourselves and let me know. I tend to be quite informal about how I do these things, so you should really feel very free to cut me off. The other thing I'm going to do is at some points throughout, I'm going to actually ask you to type some answers into the chat box. And that's because I'm going to kind of give you a little pop quiz to see how you're doing. So let me see if I can monitor that while we're talking. Okay, I think I've got that. So I'm going to kind of give you some little pop quizzes as we're going. Excellent, so I can see that. All right, so let's get started. Stop share, I'm sorry. We did a tech check and now I've messed it up. Okay, very good. So you can see my screen again? Sorry, can someone just unmute and say yes?
No.
Oh, sorry, everyone. Zoom, share screen, keynote, share, play. Now you can.
Yes.
Got it. All right, great. Thanks for that. So what I'm going to be talking about today is light sources and how they relate to color. And I wanted to motivate this by giving, an example of a really, to my mind, fascinating class of illusions that rely almost entirely on light sources. So this is known as a metamerism. I imagine a bunch of you, but maybe not all of you, will have heard of these. But metamerisms describe illusions where objects that are different colors appear the same color under certain lighting sources. So this is an example of one. So here on the right, you should be able to see my arrow. You've got two different balls that are illuminated under neon lighting. And under neon lighting, they're clearly different colors. But if you then take the identical balls and you place them under this type of fluorescent lighting, they in fact appear indistinguishable. And so this is kind of quite a well-known phenomena, especially in the fashion industry. The kind of classical example of this is if you go into a store and you try on makeup, try on foundation, and you look at it under the in-store lighting, and it seems like it matches your skin tone quite well. And then you go out under sunlight and suddenly it doesn't look like it's such a good match. So that's an example of where under one lighting condition, namely in-store lighting, historically fluorescent, quite low color rendering index. It can look the same as your skin, so foundation can look the same color as your skin. But once you go out into sunlight, which has got a higher color rendering index, it actually appears different. And so, it looks like you're wearing splotchy makeup. This is actually used there are a bunch of light-based artists that use this. I'll come to some examples at the end, but it's a really interesting example of why the color of light or, a light source itself can affect the appearance of an object, namely its color. So what I want to do today is actually unpick a bit of that. If you want some more information about this particular phenomena, there's some recommended reading that I linked to at the bottom. There's a great photography book called Color Management by Tom Ash. And there's a nice little primer that I give my undergraduate students on metamerisms and metameric failure in there. But what I want to do in this lecture is kind of just give you a 101 on the kind of physics foundations of where this comes from. So to do that, I think it's useful to have this kind of super fast overview of where our perception of color comes from. So when I look at my computer screen and I see this color green, like where is that coming from? And I'm going to break it down into kind of 3 different areas. And I'm actually only going to focus on the first in this lecture, but I wanted to give you this broader context. So none of this should be unfamiliar to you. You're all, highly accomplished practitioners, but it's useful to break it down. So the first thing that influences a color that we perceive is what is known as the emission spectra of an illuminating light source. So basically that's the light that whatever is shining on your object gives out. And so obviously there are lots and lots of different types of light. You've got sunlight, artificial lighting, candle lighting, bulbs, bioluminescence, lots and lots of different types of light, and they've all got their own different characteristics. So that determines strongly what we see. The second thing that determines what we see when the light comes out of our light source, number one, the second thing we see as the light comes out, the second thing that influences is an object that the light strikes. So for example, if we have a green apple, the apple has an inherent color in itself. It's partly determined by the color of the light that shines on it, but it's also got an inherent color. If things didn't have their own inherent color, then all objects would appear the same color under the same lighting source. So in the case of a green apple, for example, what happens is if your light source shines, for example, say red, green, and blue light on your green apple, then the green apple is going to reflect everything, absorb everything except the green. So this green apple, in fact, absorbs red and blue light, and it reflects the green light. And, quantitatively, we say that the colors it reflects is determined by something called the reflectance spectra of the object. So the reflectance spectra of the object is a second factor that determines the color that we perceive. And then the third and final thing that determines a color that we perceive is actually the human eye, or basically our own rods and cones filtered through our brain's ability to process and see color. So I say that the tristimulus value of our cones and the neurological interpretation that comes with them. So for example, if I shine red plus green plus blue light on this green apple, the apple is going to absorb everything except the green light, and it's going to reflect the green light. And when that green light hits our eye has in it three cones, three light detecting cells. It's got a short or a blue cone, it's got a medium or a green cone, and it's got a red or a long cone. And basically when green light hits our eye, it enters in through the front of the eye, through the lens, then it'll hit this area at the back of the eye called the retina, and it'll induce a bioelectric activity on a specialized cell at the back of the eye, and the cell it will induce that activity on is a green one. And very basically speaking, that green cone will then send an electrical signal to our brain, and our brain will interpret that green signal as what in philosophy we call the qualia, or the kind of sensation of seeing green. Okay, so those are the kind of basic processes that go into determining colors we see. But today I'm just going to be focusing on number one, and I'm going to be kind of doing it at a sort of 101 physics level. And kind of part of the reason for that is I think, you know, it's been a humbling experience learning about color. I actually kind of trained in theoretical physics and only came into an art practice and an interest in color somewhat down the road. And, you know, the more I do, the more I realize I don't really know anything. And so I'm kind of reminded of this quite funny comic. So there's kind of a web comic called XKCD. And I've got a little demonstration of, you know, the evolution of my understanding of color. So I'll give you a minute to read it. And what I'd like you to do is just type in the chat, just whereabouts do you see yourself on that in terms of your evolution of understanding of color. I'll go first, and I'll say that I'm actually about 2/3 of the way down, but definitely not at the bottom. I'm still actually kind of a fair distance from the bottom. So I'll give you a second to read that, and then just type in the chat, where do you see yourself in terms of your understanding of color? All right, so I'm not quite sure whether the chat, yes. All right, so people are starting to respond in the chat. So David is the one who seemingly understands everything, and it lands on his place. Oh, all right, so we've got a pretty advanced audience at the moment. So people are kind of coalescing around the bottom 2/3. Oh, excellent. Yeah, most of my students, admittedly a different audience, kind of sit somewhere near the top, maybe halfway, maybe number 2. Okay, so what I want to do based on that is actually just give you a bit of an introduction to kind of the physics-based way that I introduce color in my class and why I do it like that. Okay, so what I want to do is kind of, again, get a sense of how you all approach questions around color by posing this question to you. And again, let's just see some answers in the chat. So how would you all define white light? Just give me kind of a 5 or 10 word definition of how you would define white light. So again, let's just drop this in the chat. How would you define white light? Okay, interesting. The source of all color, all the colors of the spectrum. Equal stimulation of the cones. Yep, these are all good, valid answers. A mixture of light wavelengths perceived as white, the sun, no light, no color. Interesting. All right, so this is the definition I'm going to use, and obviously it's kind of highly context dependent. So I say that white light is an even mixture of all spectral colors, or all the spectral colors. Okay, and so what I mean by that is, if you take the spectral colors, namely the colors in the rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, if you take them and you combine them, so, people tend to think, it's quite an interesting example, people tend to think the light's coming from left to right and being split, but actually what I'm trying to illustrate here is the light coming from right to left and it being combined into white. If you combine all these colors, you actually produce what I'm going to call white light. But one of the interesting things about white light is you can actually get lots of different types of white light. So I think you're all familiar with that, but I think, again, it's a useful exercise just to popcorn it out from you. Can you give me some examples of sources of white light? So there are lots and lots of different places white light can come from, but can you give me some examples of sources of white light? And you can interpret that question kind of very broadly to mean what you want. So the sun is a good example. What else? What else is a source of so-called white light? The moon, the sun, the moon. Yep, the moon's going to be reflecting light of the sun. Yeah, camera flash. Yeah, a refrigerator. Okay, so yeah, great. Fluorescent tubes, 5,000 K bulbs, computer screens, cell phones, LEDs. Excellent. So these are all different good examples of white light. But they're in fact all quite different types of white light, and they're going to have different utilities and different functions. And one of the limitations of kind of the language that we often use in color education is that it's too reductive. And so when we talk about quote unquote white light, we can in fact mean a lot of different things. So all of those examples you gave me are indeed examples of white light. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you'll find out those sources are actually all quite different. And what's important is to come up with some ways and some tools of describing the ways in which they're different and why they're different. So what I'm going to do here is introduce to you kind of a tool that we use all the time in physics, what is known as an emission spectra. So I assumed, but Ingrid and Luan told me otherwise. I assumed that it's part of a standard art education to learn about these, but I was told it's not. So I'm going to take a minute to dwell on this, which is known as an emission spectra. It's kind of a pretty fundamental concept in physics. And what I'm going to show to you here is an example of two different emission spectra. So an emission spectra is basically a graph that describes the amount of different colored light in a given light source. So here on the top graph, I'm showing you the sun. So this is the sun. And what I'm doing here is showing its emission spectra. And what I have here along this x-axis is basically the different colors or wavelengths of the light that go into making up the sun's light. And here on the y-axis is the brightness or the amount of those different colors that are present. So what you can see here is that the sun has actually got all the different colors of the spectrum. It's got all the different colors of the spectrum with varying degrees of brightness, such that it's kind of peaked in the kind of bluey green area. But basically, it's pretty present throughout. There's actually white light. There's actually pretty much all the spectral colors in sunlight, and unsurprisingly, that is why if you refract or break apart white sunlight in a prism, you get all the colors. So this is what is known as the spectra of the sun. It's the amount of different spectral colors in the sun. And what I want to do is contrast the white light that comes from the sun with the white light that comes from, for example, a compact fluorescent bulb here. So if you take a compact fluorescent bulb and you look at the amount of different spectral colors that sit within it, and you can do that using a prism or a little handheld device I'll talk about later called a spectrometer. If you look at that, you'll see that actually a fluorescent light bulb has actually not got a smooth spectrum at all. It's actually got bumps in the blue area, and then it's relatively well populated in the green, some yellow, red, other little bumps. And you can see that this has actually got a far less than full spectra compared to the sun. Now, why that's kind of interesting and important is that if you look at these both with the naked eye, the odds are you might struggle to distinguish between them looking directly at these light sources. You know, although, as I always remind my students, you shouldn't ever look directly at the sun. But if you were to, the white, the color that comes from this and the white that comes from that are actually, in many cases, indistinguishable to the human eye, even though their spectra are quite different. And in fact, as you'll know from, you know, trying to paint under fluorescent lighting versus painting in sunlight, the difference only becomes apparent once you start to illuminate other objects with it. And so what is a kind of useful way to talk about the colors that come from these objects if you don't have access to these full spectra? What is a useful way? And so what I'm doing now is I want to kind of pop out a question to all of you, which is, what are some ways that we classify light sources with shorthand? So sometimes we use little shorthands to talk about the nature of a light source. So maybe you're buying a bulb and you talk about a light source. What are some of the kind of shorthands that we use to classify them? So just drop that in the chat box. I'm kind of just popcorning out some curious. So yeah, color temperature, that's a great example. So color temperature is kind of a single number that we use to classify kind of a wide swathe of information. What else? What else? CRI, color rendering index, excellent. So color rendering index, color temperature. Yeah, I think I had one more that I'll just share out. LRV, I don't think I actually know LRV. If someone would be kind enough to kind of type that out in full form, that would be useful to me. But the three I chose were the color temperature, the color rendering index. Oh yeah, the light reflectance value, yes. The other one we choose, sometimes we talk about kind of line spectra, continuous spectral band spectra. So these are all kind of shorthands that talk about some of the properties of these different spectra. So for example, a fluorescent bulb here, this has got a less filled in spectra, so we actually would give it a lower color rendering index, kind of typical values for fluorescent bulbs. They're quite good now, but you know, they kind of get up into the 90s occasionally, whereas sunlight would be 100. Color temperature, in fact, really hasn't got much to do with how filled this in. It's really more to do with where the peak of this is. And line, continuous, or band kind of refers to the degree to which these are filled in. And if you look, if you kind of go look, and this is something I have my students do, I kind of send them to the hardware store and go look at a bunch of lighting sources. If you go look at the back of a light bulb case, you'll see this kind of shown here on the right. And I think this is a Department of Energy. Yeah, it's Department of Energy mandated description. You'll see they actually use a couple of different shorthands. They use this, the color rendering index. It's a number between 0 and 100 to describe how full that spectrum is. And then also use this color temperature metric. And so even in kind of commercial uses, we're using very, very shortened, abbreviated descriptions of different lighting sources, and that's extremely limiting. So what I want to do now is kind of introduce you to kind of the full range of different white light sources in the way that's most useful to see them. And that is this. So just out of curiosity, just kind of tap in the chat box. Just tap in the chat box. If you can look at these, what do you think these look like to the naked eye? Can describe what you think these different, very different spectra look like to the naked eye. Yeah, so Nora's in the chat box saying they all look the same. Yep. Yeah, so people are starting to kind of get the picture, and that's right. So most of these are actually all going to look same. They might look a little bit different if you're a tetrachromate. You might be able to differentiate. High pressure sodium lamps are definitely kind of yellowy tinged. But with the exception of that, all of these are actually going to appear here white. Yeah, David's right. So this is to lowest order and approximation, but all of these very, very different spectra actually are all going to be quite different. And so I think it's kind of useful. I think it's all kind of useful to kind of go through these a bit and talk about exactly why they are so different. And so in doing that, I kind of want us to all just remember what these graphs are showing. So these graphs are simply showing that for any given light source, so for example, here is sunlight, for any different light source, if we take it and we shine that light source through a prism or something like a spectrometer, what it's going to show is that it's made up of a variety of different spectral colors with different varying degrees of brightness. So sunlight's going to have all the different colors, whereas an incandescent bulb, again, it kind of depends on the temperature. The incandescent bulb is going to actually probably be tilted a bit towards red, kind of a yellowy warm color, but it's also going to have all the colors present, whereas something like an LED, so the little light emitting diodes that you might get on Christmas lights, they're actually just made up of 3 fairly monochromatic diodes, a blue, a green, and a red. So they've actually got an entirely different light emitting spectra. But when they hit our eyes, they're kind of by design designed to activate our blue, our green, and our red cones, and therefore induce a perception of being quote unquote white, even though they're not. And so the question that kind of I wanted to leave you with, or the question I kind of wanted to pose, given all this, is kind of why does it matter that these are also very different, and kind of how would you motivate your students to care? And the way I kind of like to do that is by showing a couple of examples of where white light sources, so sources that look white if you're just kind of looking directly at them, kind of nominally, a lot of these ones are going to end up looking very different depending on the context. So the first example I like to give is in the context of kind of what's called a reflectance spectra, or kind of when you illuminate a subject. So anyone who does photography will be very, very familiar with this. And what I'm doing here is kind of harking back to that very early description I gave about how the color of an object that we perceive is influenced by 3 things: by the light that shines on it, by its reflectance spectra, and then by how we perceive it. So what I'm showing here is an example of where 2 different quote unquote white light sources are leading to different colors. So here, initially, what I'm doing is I'm showing a white light source that's kind of slightly more peaked in the reddish part of the spectrum. It's still white, but it's slightly more peaked there. And I illuminate a person whose kind of inherent reflectance spectra, that is, this is a graph that shows the degree to which that object reflects colors of those wavelengths. So this person reflects blue less well than it reflects red. So when you shine light of this color on something that reflects these colors, you get this, which is kind of called the total spectra, which is a combination of them. And you see it's got a bit of a peak in the yellowy part, but drops towards the red. And what I want you to see is how, if you contrast the appearance of this subject under this white light, you can see how it actually differs from the appearance of this person when they're the same reflectance spectra, but they're illuminated by a light source with a little more red and a little more green. And you can see that when you illuminate this person with that different light source, you can actually get slightly more peaked greens and slightly more peaked reds, and that changes their appearance. Now, it's totally possible, and in fact, by construction, what I'm doing here is giving you examples of two different light sources which have the same color rendering index and are both full spectrum in a sense of white. But even though they're both got a CRI of 100 and are both considered quote unquote white, you're actually getting quite different object appearances. And the reason that that CRI measure isn't enough is that really, if you want to get a full picture of a light source, you actually have to look at it in terms of this emission spectra. If you want to kind of get really technical and mathematical about it, the issue is that you're trying to collapse kind of an infinite dimensional, no, sorry, you're trying to collapse an infinite dimensional space, kind of a color space, onto a single value. And therefore, there's necessarily a loss of information. You're always going to get a loss of information when you try and collapse high dimensions into lower dimensions in general. And the result of that is you're going to get redundancies, that is, things that have the same one-dimensional representation, but are in fact quite different. So that's one example. Another example I like to give is kind of this metameric example. So Mark Leckie at MoMA 2016 used this, but really it's just an example of using the kind of sodium lighting they used to get in street lighting. You know, it's kind of a funny thing teaching in the year 2023 in Brooklyn. You know, when I started teaching about 7 years ago, I used to be able to send my students out into Brooklyn and kind of find this street lighting everywhere. But you know, New York's done some quite good renovations in the last 5-10 years. And what's happened is they've now actually replaced all the sodium lighting with kind of efficient LED lighting. And so you have to kind of go deeper and deeper into Brooklyn before you can find this. But what we have here is kind of another example of a light source with interesting properties that you don't quite capture if you're just looking at single numbers. So this is going to be sodium lighting, which you may happen to know has got a color rendering index of 0 because it's kind of a single wavelength or close to a single wavelength. And what happens when you have a single wavelength or a CRI of 0, you actually get objects that have very different reflectance spectra appearing the same. So you actually kind of get a monochromatic, yellow tinged yellow black coming out of it all. And the way to really understand that is to be able to look at the emission spectra of the light source and see what happens when it combines. Then the final example I like to give is there's an Italian artist duo called Karanowski that I like a lot that really work very cleverly with this. I don't think, oh yeah, here we go. So this is the nice example of how it works. So what they do is they paint objects in CMY, and then they illuminate them under monochromatic RGB. And what happens is you can see very dramatically how the color of the light source affects the reflectance of the objects that come off it. So this is in fact a fantastically easy phenomena to set up in the classroom. You know, I've got a whole lab I do with the students, and the equipment costs, I think it costs $20 to do, and you have them play a little game show where they're trying to compete with each other to sort colors under these sort of metameric lighting conditions. But again, the explanation for this kind of in terms of a teaching tool very much relies on being able to understand this spectral or emission spectra description of light. So kind of last but not least, kind of useful in understanding emission spectra is this dress. You know, I'm sure we've all used it a bunch of times in the classroom, but just in case you haven't come across it, let me try and explain the problem. So this was an optical illusion, if that's the right word, that was very prominent about 10 or 15 years ago. So what is shown is this middle picture, and the question that everyone is asked is the true color of the dress, as shown on the left, white and gold, and it's kind of shown under a bluish emission spectra that colors it like this, or is the true color of the dress here, and it's shown under kind of a quite bright white spectra that colors it such. And so everyone seems to have different opinions, but what is kind of universally acknowledged is that this is an example where the light source or the emission spectra of an object, an emission spectra of a light source plus the reflectance spectra can lead to kind of two different redundancies. And really the only way to truly determine what it is would be to know the true emission spectra of the light source. Okay. So just before I wrap up, I thought I wanted to give an opportunity to ask if there are any kind of questions about those three examples. I know we've got some time at the end. And if there aren't, what I'm just going to leave you with is a little example about how you can start to get your hands on finding out the emission spectra of a light source. And so this isn't something we're going to go into in a ton of detail today, but this is something I have my students do. So one of the things I have my students do is get hold of one of these. So these are called spectroscopes. You can buy them on Amazon Prime for $9.89. All of my students have one. A very simple object. You kind of can't quite see from here, but basically it's a piece of plastic about the size of a soda can, and you put your eye to one end, and then you can't see it here, but there's a little slit. Actually, there's a little slit here, and you point that little slit at a light source, and light enters. And there's a little diffraction grating, which effectively acts the same as a prism, that splits that light source into a full rainbow. And then you can just look in through a little eyepiece here, and you can see basically a rainbow of that different light source. And so one of the fun activities I have students do is go around campus, and I try to get them to identify about, I think, 8 different types of light source. I have them identify 8 different types of light source. And what I say to them is, see if you can, just by comparison, determine what the nature of that light source is by seeing whether their emission spectra kind of fits the overall pattern. So, does it look like it's something that's got a broad band, kind of all the colors, and then can you infer what it is? And if they're good, they'll say it's an incandescent lamp. Or if they look at a computer screen, or kind of a device, they'll often notice that it's something like this. So it might be an LED screen, something like that. Or if they're looking at the car park lights, they'll be able to notice that it's that, or fluorescent lights in our classroom. So that's quite a useful activity, and they're very cheap and they're very easy to use. And then an additional thing I do is, if it's kind of quite a makey class, sometimes I teach classes which have quite a strong maker component. There's actually a website called Spectral Workbench, and they actually provide instructions for you to build one of these on your own. And all you need for this is kind of some cardstock and an old CD player. And so that actually tends to be quite a fun class. You can build this entirely from scratch yourself. And they have a bit of a buggy website, but the idea is that this should actually be able to kind of sit on the camera of your phone. And then you can actually go around and record and gather information about different light sources that you can use. And then photographers actually quite like to use that when they're setting up their shoots. Okay. So I think I've come in a bit under time, but I'm going to actually stop here and open the floor to questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Mark. That was a very inspiring talk, and very happy to hear what you're doing with your students. So I will have a look at the chat. If anyone has a question for Mark, please put your question in the chat, and then we can go through them. Mark, I'm just wondering, how big are the classes that you teach? How many students?
Yeah, I tend to teach the studio style classes, about 15 students. They tend to be 3 hours long. I kind of use quite an active learning approach. We tend to do quite extended interactive labs where it's inquiry based. So yeah, but I have managed to, I gave a talk at Google a couple of years ago, and we managed to do quite a bunch of these demos for a large auditorium of a couple of hundred people, and that worked fine, provided you've got enough like diffraction gratings or little bits of equipment. But you can scale this stuff very inexpensively.
So there's a question in class from Luann. What disciplines are the students from that take your class, and is it a required class?
So it's not a required class. Well, so at Pratt, we've got, they've got a math science requirement, but they can actually take one of 30 or 40 classes. So no, it's not a required class. It's very popular amongst photographers and filmmakers. They seem very keen on it. Quite a lot of interior designers are actually quite keen on it as well. We've got quite a strong lighting design department or lighting design speciality. So quite a lot of people there take it. It tends to be a hodgepodge. I'm trying to think who tends to struggle with it. I think the the fine arts students, yeah, I think the fine arts students tend to come to it with quite a lot of baggage about color mixing. Yeah, so I think a lot of them have got quite strong intuitions about how colors mix that's derived from painting, and then it's a bit surprising when you start to break it down and differentiate between additive and subtractive color mixing. And it takes a little while for them to kind of unlearn their intuitions because they're so used to just doing subtractive color mixing. And then they get, they actually tend to get, there's quite a good aha moment when we cover pointillism or optical color mixing, where, it all comes together, like, right, it's mixing with paint, but it's not actually, the mixing of pigments, it's something else. So they really tend to like it once they get to a certain point.
I think that relates to a question that Ingrid put. What is the most challenging thing for you or your students when teaching color and light? Is there anything besides that sort of unlearning of maybe a more cognitive based approach to color?
Yeah, I think there's, there's a very, very, well, so let me kind of caveat this by saying, like, the way I think about the world is influenced by my training. But given that, I feel like there's often a very strong desire from the students for me to kind of just tell them the answer. They want to know, okay, so color rendering index isn't a good proxy for an emission spectra, or color temperature is not a good proxy. Okay, just tell me the proxy, or just tell me the shortcut. Like, how does it work? Tell me the answer. And one of the things I kind of try to impress on them is that, unfortunately, there's just not a simple answer. It is just actually as complicated as, you need a full two-dimensional graph that shows the strength of every color, if you want the whole story. Now, in certain situations, those proxies might work, but often they're going to go wrong. So, it's horses for courses. You have to decide how much error you're willing to tolerate. So I think that's a bit difficult. One of the things that I was actually kind of quite delighted by, that's changed over the past decade or so, is when you do a kind of physics-based teaching of color, you need to talk about light as an electromagnetic wave. So light is an electromagnetic wave. The visible part of the spectrum is kind of a little bit of it. A little bit of it. And there are other things like UV light and infrared light and X-rays. And, you know, when I started teaching this, I think there was quite a lot of knee-jerky reaction to the word radiation. So electromagnetic radiation kind of conjured a lot of associations. And through nothing to do with me over the years, I think there's been kind of a building of what I'd call science literacy, which means that students are kind of approaching light, as I understand it, as a physical phenomena as well as an artistic tool. And I find that quite surprising and you know, actually quite good.
Do they ultimately really understand spectra at the end once they've seen the graphs? And Dave has a question here. Would your students follow the science well enough if you stuck to wavelengths, not spectral colors, and object reflectance, not inherent color? So I guess what level of terminology are they comfortable with? And by the end of the course, if they look at a spectrum, is that then a tool that they can go and use and you know, incorporate into their practice?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question to ask to what extent they incorporate it into their practices. I mean, in terms of the assessments I give them, by the end of the class, you will fail the class if you don't know what a reflectance spectra is, or if you can't identify a light source by its emission spectra. So we'll definitely be using those kind of technical terms by the end. I think in terms of what they actually take away from the class 6 months down the line, you know, I would really hope that that joins up with their practice, but you know, I've never actually done a longitudinal study to see how much it does. I think that would be a really interesting question. You know, what I do when I teach is I try and introduce them to kind of metacognitive concepts, like ask them questions about, you know, how do you think you learn? Like, what do you think you're taking away? And I introduce concepts like Bloom's taxonomy of learning. And I try to explain to them that, you know, the goal of this class is by the end, you're not just regurgitating knowledge, you're actually being able to create with it. And so the capstone project for the course is it's basically a creative project that uses material covered in the course in some sort of artistic expression. And so based on that, it seems like there is actually an incorporation of this material into their practice, at least for the projects that are scoring A's and B's. But, you know, it's hard to know. Assessments are it's a very tricky business.
Mm-hmm. Maggie asked, what do you think the most useful color and light exercise is for art and design students?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't know from a kind of art practice point of view. I could say that the exercise I do with them that I think delivers the most bang for the buck, most bang for your buck. There are a couple. So, you know, one of the exercises I really like is kind of related to that Karanovsky kind of GIF I showed you. So there's an exercise I have where basically the students get a pack of M&Ms and they put the M&Ms on a table, and they kind of take one of those LED strips that have red, green, and blue lights, and they wind that around the M&Ms, and then you illuminate the M&Ms with kind of monochromatic green light, and you try and sort the M&Ms. Under that green light, and it becomes very difficult. And then you change it to red and you try and sort them again, and it becomes very difficult. And it's incredibly fun. kind of, you can do a bit of a game show. So they really like that because it kind of shows
Mm.
the limitations of human vision.
That's a great exercise.
Yeah, so that gives a lot of bang for the buck. I think they also quite like this one with the spectrometers. You can kind of just walk around campus. You can actually see how all these nominally different light sources are really very different. Those are good. There are a couple of good color illusions that they like to play with. That's got audible wows in the past. Yeah, so things like that.
Great. Well, please join me in thanking Mark for a terrific talk, and your course looks amazing, and I'm sure your students have a great time with it. And I'm just so happy to see, that infusion of science into the art and design practice. So if everyone wants to turn your cameras on and clap, or if you want to do put a reaction, but please join me in thanking Mark for a very intriguing talk. And we didn't get to all the questions. Maybe you can, Mark can be in touch through the chat with people. So thank you again.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Mark, well, I have a million questions myself, and we've already talked about, down the road, we're looking for training for, I'm from the art and design background, and this is all new, and where am I on the spectrum of how much I know? I'm trying to learn, and so this has been so helpful to me. And, especially since you do work, with students and with, at Pratt, that's just a great, I don't know, bellwether to show that it can be done. And I have heard from some of the students and other faculty at Pratt, I know it's such a dynamic class, and it's something that we just, I think with the color literacy project, we feel strongly that understanding what color is and why the appearances change with different light sources, that when we learn about what happens with light, we are able to take some time to dig into, to what's going on with light. It's so important, and not even just for art and design, but basically for everybody. We don't realize how much it influences us. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to another one of our colleagues in the color literacy project, and that is Ingrid Calvo-Ivanovic. And you heard Ingrid give the first color presentation at the first color literacy forum. And just before Ingrid comes on, I'm just saying that we want to try something new with those of you that are on the call now, because we really do value your feedback, and we are trying to, recording the data that you're helping us with, so that we can help to put together and design these color modules for plug-in modules for for teachers to use. So I'm going to turn it over to Ingrid, and I'm interested in what happens with our next experiment with all of you. So Ingrid.
Thank you, Luann. Hello, everyone. We want to do an interactive activity with all of you. This activity that we are going to propose to you is answering 2 questions through a live poll tool, in which we will have the possibility to immediately see the answers of the audience. So this is how it's going to work. This activity that we are going to propose to you now, it has 2 main aims that we, as the color literacy group, think is fair for you to know. It's the first aim is to collect data from your needs, from the needs that you may have as teachers, and this is directly related with the second goal, which is defining the future goals of our project regarding this topic that we had heard today from Mark and his great talk, and which is color and light. So that's why we are going to ask you 2 main questions, and we are going to share the different answers that you may get, that you may give, and we are going to be reflecting on it and commenting on it. So the thing that I'm going to ask you to do is we are going to work with an app that you can use in your phone, It's a online website. You don't have to install anything. You can go through your phone to the website that I'm going to tell you now, or also you can open a new window on your computer in your internet navigator. What we are going to do is to go to this website that I'm going to put immediately in the chat box, and you go there. You can answer the question that you are going to find. I am going to open it in a second, and then I ask you to come back to the Zoom call so we can see live answers of the live poll. So I'm going to share my screen with you also so we can see the different answers that we are going to get, and I'm going to activate also the first question so you can go there and answer. So the app is going to ask you for a code that you already have in the chat box, and I'm going to present it right now. So from this moment on, you should be seeing, if you go to the menti.com app and you put the code that you can see in the chat box, which is 83278436, you probably are seeing the first question of our interactive session. So I can see that there is already some people that is sharing their answers.
And Ingrid, did you want to point out about the, we can have two screens open at the same time?
Yeah. If you are working with your phone, you probably can have your phone and see the Zoom call, the answers that we are getting. And if you are doing this in your computer, I kindly ask you to, after you answer the question, you can come back to the Zoom call, and we can see, you can see my screen, the different answers that we're getting. So we are going to give some minutes for you to answer, every one of you for you to answer. You may be very inspired maybe by what Mark showed us or talk about. So this is also a bit of a reflection on what we have seen. We just have seen in Mark talks. So yes, Gwen, if you want.
Yeah, I was going to say that we would love to use, so with lab work, for example, you know, since this is interactive with all of you, we really want to dig in. Go ahead and put up more than one answer and give us some more examples of what you mean or what you're thinking about with that. And I'm going to be helping read the answers, and so is Harold, another member of our team. So and so we want to be able to dig. Yeah, so you'll see one of the areas that we're looking at. Just any reflections on those? Harold, do you want to start with the reading some?
Yeah, okay. So we have some answers already. There's lab work. Okay, now it's rolling on. Okay. Hand-on exercises, class activities, spinning discs, additive average mixing process, hands-on exercises, however, not necessarily hampered by mixing color, as this is complicated. Just use colored paper, cut out papers, etc. Hands-on and collaborative exercises. Hands-on exercises.
I noticed the one start early with youngest children in dark dens with torches and colored objects. That actually sounds quite mysterious.
Yeah. Watching light during the day change for one setting inside. Didn't quite catch that. Start early with the youngest children, yeah. In dark dens with torches and colored objects.
I think we all should do that.
Yeah, watch light during the day change for one setting inside or out. Should that be one sitting? I don't know.
And you know what, let me see something. I just saw hands-on and collaborative exercises. Whoever wrote that, that's good. That's something that we talk a lot about on the team for the Color Literacy Project, and which is collaboration. So if you could, anybody that's here, for those of you that are commenting, and that's everybody, what kind of collaborative exercises, if you've done some of these, work the best? Because teamwork it's really good. It's a little bit hard to do. So there's any ideas you have about that would be great.
Yeah, there's also looking at the variations in the appearance of colors in light and shadow in the room you are in.
Spinning discs, that wasn't talked about before or in this talk, but it's definitely, Robin, I guess you could comment on the spinning discs.
Sure. Yeah, they're a great way to show the variations in color mixing. I think what Mark was talking about earlier of how, the painting students come in with very, prescriptive or from their past experience about how paints mix, but stretching out to mixing on a spinning disc, or like his comment on how doing something with pointillism changes how can flick a switch on and see how you working that way with color is different. And then also the colored light. So there's these 3 different types of mixing, and that's something that we've done and we put in with the teacher training that we've done with the elementary and school teachers, and that's something that's applicable for every level because it sort of moves you away from just using paint to mix. You want to be able to work with all media and you want to see what happens in each situation. So it's a good one to kind of branch out because the mixed color changes depending on the process of the mixing.
Yeah, I want to return to this watching light during the day change for one setting inside or out. Okay, so now I understand the one setting. So you're looking at one scene and watching the light change there. I'm wondering the use of photography in this. Of course, I mean, cameras kind of capture the colors and the light differently from the eye. And of course, the eye keeps adapting to the changing light, but it could be quite interesting and useful. And that is, in fact, in my experience, to compare the experience with the photographs.
And Harold, that reminds me of something that you have in your book where where you look at a room, if you want to talk about that, and how if you look at the light, you say this is white, the table's white, but it's gray, and all these, it turns different colors in the light, and you have an interesting, I think, exercise about that. Yeah,
of course. I mean, this is all about color constancy as well, and which and adaptation of the eye to different to the different spectra that Mark was talking about earlier on, and which of course makes everything really more complicated, but also more interesting and exciting that we are such adaptable animals that we tend to see objects the same, more or less the same color in very, very different illuminations. Okay, there's this one saying now, using a light box to show 2 different color light sources and the effect of the color of light on the color of the material. So this is I guess exactly what I was talking about just now. So if you're looking at objects or colors or colored objects in sequence, and the light keeps changing, then you don't tend to notice the way the reflectance spectrum changes. So, but if you have them side by side simultaneously, then it can be really dramatic. Like in the first slide that Mark showed, it can be really dramatic, and that's something that I think is very. It's a good didactic method to compare these 2.
Yes. And, I think one of the things that I keep thinking about is, talking to my fellow people who teach, I guess, art and design, not just studio art, but design. This is something that Ingrid, I think you could comment on in your survey about who who teaches, or we have an opportunity to be able to teach color and light, especially to some emerging design fields. It seemed like it'd be good for you to comment on that.
Yeah. When I did my PhD research, I found that color and light was maybe one of the most addressed topics in all the different color courses that I analyzed and that I presented in the first version of the forum. So, but at the same time, teachers were having a lot of challenges in teaching color and light, related to sometimes they couldn't afford the color and light materials, or universities or schools sometimes have difficulties to having a light box or a spectrophotometer or a colorimeter. And I think it's related to one of the comments that we can see in the answers of the question, because using a light box or working with different light sources, sometimes if you want to work with controlled light sources, it may become a challenge for the different institutions, as sometimes controllable light sources or materials may be very expensive. So that's why I think it's super related to what Mark was presented today, and this super affordable spectroscope, and being creative on how to bypass those challenges. Also, another of the answers that we are seeing on the screen, or that are passing in the screen, is related to looking the appearance of color and light in the room and shadow in the room you are in. So sometimes. Getting materials and getting expensive materials can be a big challenge, but some other times you may overcome those challenges by being very creative and thinking out of the box of what can you do with your students, and trying to take advantage of their daily experience and their observation of the daily experience. So I think being creative is probably one of the best things when it comes to being innovative or changing the way we understand color theory, color principles, or color elements, and where we are heading also with the color literacy project. Okay, so I think maybe it's time so we can pass to the second question. And for that, I'm going to ask you to go again to the other window where you have the app, or if you are working with your cell phone, I'm going to show you now the second question, and then you can go there, repeat the same process, answer the question, and then come back to the Zoom call so we can see the different answers that we are getting in the live poll. So you should be now seeing the second question. If you are not seeing it, or maybe you didn't submit any answers for the first question, you will see a blue button in a blue thing that would give you or take you to the second question. It's like go to the slide box that you will see, and then you will see this second question, which is more related to resources, tools, and technologies that may be helpful for teaching color and light in your course. So please let us know what things, where could we also go in the future of our project, what things you may need as resources, tools, and technologies that may support your future color teaching or your current color teaching, and you think that that may be helpful. So we will again give you some minutes to answer this question. And also always remember, while you are answering, I can remember you, and that all these things, all these interactive tools that you are seeing here in our sessions, We are also kind of presenting them to you for you if you didn't know them yet, and that you can feel free to use them and to introduce, for instance, in your online teaching, if you have to teach color remotely, or if you want to keep your students' audience engaged. These interactive tools are the way that we are presenting them to you. For you is also for you to know them and to use them in your color courses. So please feel inspired by them. We are trying more or less to present one different tool or interactive tool in each one of our sessions. So today is it was the case of Mentimeter, and as you can see here, you can get the pulse of the audience, of your students, or if you are doing a seminar, presenting a class or a workshop, you can engage them to interact with you and have a more active participation in your talk. So this is mentimeter.com, as you have seen, and it has a free version where you can work with 2 or 3 slides, and then also there is an educational version where you can go as a teacher and try to access to a better price. So
Right. So, Harold, do you want to do some reading?
Yeah, sure. So we have sets of colored chips, such as the NCS or Mansell sets or other sorting sets. And of course, a more affordable version would be the color aid papers, but of course they're not so standardized and accurate as the NCS and Mansell chips. A list of affordable resources for students, like the spectroscope, light sources, etc. Slides, images on PowerPoint I create for each lecture. Interactive web-based tutorials could be helpful.
And you know what, I'm going to make comment. Can we ask who wrote that, or who asked that question, to talk a little bit about the that's what we're looking to do, web-based tutorials. And we actually would like for you to show your video, and also talk about the question. So who wrote that question?
Oh, you mean that answer?
The answer, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, the one about slides or images on PowerPoint. Unless you want to keep stay anonymous, but you could put it in the chat maybe. Okay, so video tutorials, access to equipment, and expert speakers. Sure, yeah. A way to project a real spectrum and use colored filters to see the interaction of light and material. Yeah, that's a really good answer, because it's not so easy to actually, in my experience, to produce a nice spectrum.
You know, Harold, I'm thinking about, while you're talking about that, if anybody in the audience, we have a lot, has some answers to these. How would you do that? If you've done it and you have a good way, to share that for us too, because we're looking for various creative ways to teach.
Yeah, because I mean, I don't know how many schools or classes nowadays have slide projectors anymore, because I found that a slide projector was a great tool for achieving a narrow beam, and you can make maybe with some aluminum foil or something like a slit in a slide, make a kind of gobo, and then have a very narrow beam, which is what you need to create the spectrum, a very narrow beam, and then a prism. You pass the light, the very narrow beam, through the prism, and then you get a spectrum. But if somebody has some better answers, then.
Well, we have a Color Muse Mini Spectral. Who wrote that? Who gave us
What?
Color Muse Mini Spectral? We were just looking for the.
Oh yeah, the Color Muse Mini Spectral. That must be some kind of.
Yeah, tell us about that. Whoever wrote that.
Or maybe, or maybe you could provide a link or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that
So-
Sandy? Yeah.
Yeah, it
Or
was-
just
Sandy, go. Yeah, go.
it's a little tiny tool. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes,
Let me get mine one sec.
good. And that's what we're looking for. Yeah, we're looking for shared ideas here with some of these.
It's made by, or originated at Variable. It's a little spectro in your pocket. It ties into your iPhone or an Android, and you can read colors. And like NCS has their whole system in this, so I can scan a color and find it in their system for cross-referencing. It applies to shopping for products all over in one particular color, comparing products, comparing paints. You can stick it up to the wall and see what paint color it is, and if you know what manufacturer it is, you can gather that too. So it's a very useful tool.
It'd be
Many
great to have a
companies-
link in the box though for that, Sandy. That is terrific. And just while you're talking about that, would you mind saying, because I was going to mention this earlier, would you mind if someone doesn't know what NCS is, what that means?
the natural color system.
Yeah,
It's a standard color system that a lot of designers use, specifically in Europe, but it's becoming more available here in the US, and more people are becoming aware of it. It's similar to Munsell, but they do have their differences. I use both of them in my work, so. I'll see if I can find a link. I don't know.
wonderful. And Robin Myers, Robin, would you tell us about Spectral One?
Yeah, it's a small instrument. There's two versions of it. There's the Spectral One and the Spectral One Pro. They sell for about $300 retail, and it's limited to color muse. It's tied in with a lot of paint libraries and chip libraries and things. Works with your iPhone, and it wirelessly connects, and you can just click on colors and get an instant match to various color libraries, as well as see the spectrum itself.
Wow, it'd be great to see a link for that too. That's terrific. And that'd be something, Robin, that would be good in a classroom too. Like if you say not each student would have the $300 version, but that's something would seem like it'd be a good resource for the studio or the lab, right?
Yeah, the color muse is about the same cost, and they're both using similar technologies in them, just different manufacturers.
Can we ask Mark what he uses for in the classroom
Mm.
for showing spectra and getting, is it only the spectrophotometer that you showed us, or is there another tool that you use for classroom demos? If Mark is still here.
And he's still on the call, but he might be away from his.
Yeah, yeah.
But that would be, Robin, that question, anybody else in the audience too, we're getting, you see in the chat box, now we're getting some links because.
One thing you can use is that Edmund Scientific used to have a website full of educational materials, and one of the things they have is a packet of 2x2 slides with a diffraction grating in them. And so for like $10, I think, and you get like 20 or 30 or so of the little diffraction gratings. So that's a source for that.
Wow. Also, Robin, if you could get that anything about that, a link wise in the chat box, because we're keeping the chat box, everybody, and we also keep the screen. So Harold, I think there's some more questions too, if you want to address from the.
Yeah, I'm waiting for them to kind of appear. There was one about Yule's principles of color reproduction has a short chapter on making a device using a diffraction grating that projects the spectrum on a screen. Did we already cover that? I don't know, but I just.
May I
So
just say something, Harold?
Yeah.
You know, the problem is not how to project a spectrum. Today, the problem is to get a good light source, a white light source, because these video projectors we have in all classrooms are
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
not
they
full spectrum light sources. So you were right that in the good old days of slide projectors and overhead projectors, we could have a good spectrum on the screen.
Exactly, because it's a
Today it's
continuous
getting
spectrum.
difficult to get a good light source.
Yeah, that's right. You need an incandescent light source to get a good continuous spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise the video projector light source, it tends to, you get a sort of RGB spectrum.
It's not a continuous spectrum.
No, not a continuous spectrum.
And you know, I'm so interested in this conversation, and I know it's about 1:20 or well 2:25 Eastern. And I think as we are sort of wrapping it up, I also would go back something, Robin, you mentioned about what about Mark's talk, and this is so interesting to me that we're addressing, yeah, please turn on your cameras too. We want to see everybody if you can, because we wanted to see who all meet everybody. But this was the example that it's hard. It's a mind shift that has to happen in studio art. And this is also true of design, as Ingrid mentioned, that the idea of, I mean, and this is what we're really thinking about. What is the difference? What if you're going to teach color, you really need to teach the whole thing. You know, what is, you know, the physics of light and color science, and incorporate that into, you know, into the studio, because your students are going to be, not only if they're painters, but as Mark showed, you can, depending on the light, that changes, you know, and then they're going to do a lot of work digitally. So understanding light it's not just for geeks and nerds like, you know, me and, but it's for, you know, it really does a disservice to the students if they don't know this, because then they don't understand what happens. And I think Mark really touched on that, you know, teaching, you know, the students that have to struggle with that. And we just wanted to call that out and acknowledge that it is like a paradigm, it's a major paradigm shift in what color is. And that's what we're really trying to address, because there's a lot of misconceptions. So this is kind of an open conversation now at the last couple of minutes, but Dave.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that. I've had this running thing going on with Maggie in the chat this whole time, pretty much, about the use of consistent terminology, right? We heard all kinds of terminology, even among this group at the end in this conversation. The terminology is not consistent when we're talking about what is a property of an object, what does it actually mean to be a color, what, you know, all of these things. This group even is not consistently using terminology. And if this group isn't, how do we expect to be teaching the teachers how to use consistent terminology when I don't think we really are even here? So something has to be, this even needs to be straightened out at this level, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely. And, you know, and that's going to be true. I think a way to think about what we're doing with the Color Literacy Project is precisely that, you know, and we're all in this together. And as we move forward, we start to see, you know, what are the problems, and to determine, you know, the terminology and how to define it within the Color Literacy Project. We've really struggled. Maybe Robin, you could speak to terminology issue.
Well, there's been lots of arguments over stuff. And it's a question of level too, right? So what's appropriate at which level, and you don't want to contradict anything if you're learning down the line. So yeah, that's a.
Well, I would say just as an example, excuse me, Robin, just as an example, right? We heard a number of times spectral colors, right? Which is just, in my opinion, just plain inappropriate, right? We know their wavelengths. Just tell the people wavelengths, and they're going to get it, right? They're not idiots. They just aren't scientists. And if you start with wavelengths and let people understand, okay, this is the physics, and we can turn that into a color later in other ways. But when you say spectral colors, you're just right away throwing poor terminology at them that is only setting them up for confusion later. Big smiles out of David Briggs.
I saw that.
I do a thing with its linky for wavelengths, like an interactive thing, and the more energy you put into waving it up and down, you know, the shorter the frequency, the higher frequency, shorter wavelength. So that's a good physical demo. Get someone from my class, you know, play with this linky. So that's a good way to do wavelength, light, color, energy, frequency. And then, you know, they have a physical visualization, physical experience of a wavelength. And then they can take that forward and understand the relationship to eventually color. But yeah.
Well, that is a perfect, I mean, just that ending on the same wavelength. Sorry about the bad pun, but But I think, you know, that's what we're trying to do. And it's interesting that we think we have a seemingly simple, challenge, we think, and then it just turns out there's so many rabbit holes, and we're just, we really do need this feedback. We really are, excited to work with everyone, because it's very challenging, and, getting on the same page, learning the terminology so we can talk to each other and communicate well is our, and I think the last thing I would say about that is to be able to provide students or the next generation of makers and, of leaders, do a service to them to be able to pull this information together and provide them, the bigger picture so they can really see it. So I think with that, I think we would all, let's just do one more, round of applause for Mark for being with us today and guiding us through this part. Thank you so much, Mark. We really, really appreciate you. And yes, absolutely. And I think just leading the discussion, as we mentioned at the beginning, this is the first part in the 4-part series. So the next series, we're going from light, taking what we're learning here and moving to focusing on what happens when light strikes objects or matter. So that will be the next one. We're looking, probably will be in February. Everybody stay tuned. Robin, I think, it'll be listed on the color literacy website. You can keep posted there. Dave.
Just one last thing, if you do want to save the chat, I guess I would ask Luann, maybe you don't save the chat for everybody, because sometimes there's things in there that are, between you and someone else.
Yeah.
But if you just go down to where you would type the next chat and click the 3 little dots, there'll be save chat, and that will save just what your chat was. I'm certainly not going to share what my chat was. Because, well, I don't mean, it's not bad. It's just confusing, if nothing else. There's just all kinds of stuff going on there. I mean, I had side conversations that I won't admit to later.
Yeah, but also
Anyway.
most of the links that were shared today are going to be also included at the bottom of the YouTube video in our channel. So if you want to go back to them, if you go to our channel, which I posted in the chat, you will find the video of this session by the end of next week. And at the bottom of it, the description of the video, you will find all the different links that were shared today.
Perfect. Thank you so much to everybody. And we have a colorful holiday season, and we look forward to chatting with you next time. So stay posted and have a colorful day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.